that is more and more configuration driven. It's extremely configuration driven now. And it used the configuration version of the framework is called Activity Guide Composer. So the Activity Guide, when you hear the term Activity Guide Composer, it is basically the configuration driven framework that sits on top of the People Tools version of the Activity Guide framework. So there are technically two layers to it. Since we are going through this discussion and training now, I always talk about what is the latest functionality. So the Activity Guide Composer framework, which is highly configuration driven, is going to be our focus for discussion today. And I will also talk about where the interaction happens between this configuration framework and the underlying tools framework. Okay, so that you're clearly aware of the distinction as well. Now, I always highlight one thing when it comes to activity guides. In addition to this activity guide framework, there are certain other frameworks that are predominantly built for the purpose of being used in an activity guide. Things like an acknowledge framework or a questionnaire framework. These frameworks do not, they do stand alone on its own in terms of configurations and functionalities, but the ability to make use of acknowledgements and questionnaires, they are tightly coupled with the activity guide framework. So what I mean by that is the questionnaire framework helps you create questionnaires and surveys to your end users that is typically tied to an activity guide framework. Same with acknowledgement. You could add acknowledgement as part of your guided process. So there are some other frameworks that work very closely with activity guides. I will be touching upon those items as we progress, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on those individual frameworks because each one of them could be a session on its own. Okay. Here is a quick snapshot, a cheat sheet of various functionalities, at least in the HCM and FSCM application, that uses activity guides. In HCM, as you can see, it heavily used in the benefits module, life events, open enrollment, in the onboarding, offboarding process, in the HR module, position data, job data, quite a lot of usage across different module areas. Same in case of finance. I know I haven't called out campus and other applications specifically. However, the same framework is available there and are functionalities that you make use of this framework as well. With that, moving on into the next aspect. Now, before going into the system aspects of how to work with activity guides, I do want to talk about what happens before that, right? In terms of designing a guided process. I'm not going to go through every single aspect in detail here, but this information is available in the slide deck that is going to be posted as part of the presentation. So you have this information. I do want to call out a few things, like say, especially when you are thinking about creating a new guided process that is not delivered, then what are some of the prerequisite tasks, right? So one of the first thing is getting the design right? So what are some of the design elements that you need to take into consideration? To start with, working out what are going to be the individual steps that are going to be involved in your guided process, how they need to be grouped together. Maybe there are a set of steps that are payroll related, maybe there are a set of steps that are benefits related, how those can be grouped, what order the user should be able to do it, whether the steps are going to be done within the PeopleSoft application or does it have any external activities, maybe links that go outside PeopleSoft application, and who are the participants involved in the process, and how the guides are going to be assigned to the users, etc. One thing to highlight, if you have been using activity guides for a while, you would have known that when activity guides first came out, it was released as a single user activity, and later it was enhanced to be multi-user activity. A good example is onboarding activity guide that is delivered in the HR system is a single user activity guide, meaning the employee who is onboarding goes through the entire process by themselves. An offboarding activity guide that is really delivered in the HR application is a multi-user activity guide. Employees have majority of the tasks, but manager also have a task to complete as part of the offboarding. So right now, the latest version of the application and tools allows you to have multi-user activity guide. So if your guided process requires that multi-user engagement, then making sure there is a clean handoff between different steps and what tasks are assigned to what users, defining those things, maybe working all of these things in the drawing board before setting up in the system. So just a quick checklist here in terms of what are the design considerations before you even start your activities in the system. This would be the first thing to do. However, many of these items can be cut down if you're basically interested in only making some minor changes to the delivered guided process. Then you don't have to follow all of these items. You can just focus on what exactly is the change that you're going to do. Okay. I had a couple of different versions of my presentations where this particular slide was once at the beginning and then moved to the end. Once again, these slides have a lot of content and will be available in the presentation. I do want to call out this upfront because this is also would have to be factored in when you're thinking about designing new activity guides. What are some of the limitations of the delivered activity guide framework? For example, when you use external links for completing an activity, then the status of that process completion is not going to be automatically updated. So you may have to ask the user to mark that item complete because the activity is being performed outside the system. You cannot have a guided process within a guided process. There are some delivered processes within delivered components and pages within the application that are already a guided process. Like, for example, creating a pivot grid, or maybe there might be another task similar to that, that are already a guided process. So you cannot include a guided process as a step within another guided process. Things like that. So when it comes to related contents on classic pages, they will not be displayed when the classic pages are used within an activity guide. So these are some of the things that you need to be aware of. However, most often when we build custom activity guides, at least in my experience over the last 3-4 years, we have been dealing with mostly fluid pages for customers. And I personally haven't come across a limitation that basically we have to work around or have an alternative. These limitations are good to be aware of before you start building them, but very rarely you would come across a scenario that would be affected by these limitations. Okay. All right. Now, when it comes to building custom activity guides, maybe this one slide is essentially the what I would call as a playbook of what all needs to be done, and what all are the various components of this framework, and what are mandatory versus what are optional. Everything is in this one slide. So in the picture on the left-hand side, if you notice, there are two items on the left end, which is the activity guide composer category and the activity guide composer templates. Now, those are the two mandatory and critical pieces of building and maintaining an activity guide. Everything else is essentially optional portion to it. So we'll talk about what these two things do and what are the other aspects to it. And as you can see in the picture itself, everything with this dotted line are optional configuration. Okay. So the majority of work involved in building and maintaining the activity guide would fall under these two things, the activity guide category and the activity guide templates. Now, one thing to remember is when it comes to activity guides, upfront, there is technical work involved in terms of setting up activity guides. What I'm referring to is when you have to create new guided process from the scratch. You need to, let's say you have a business requirement to create a guided process entirely from scratch, then there is upfront technical work involved. If you are picking up a delivered guided process, be it open enrollment, be it a chart field request process or onboarding, offboarding, any of those processes, if you're picking up that process and you want to make changes to that, then that upfront technical work has already been done by Oracle. It's already available. So you don't have to go through the technical process again. So the reason I'm calling that out is when there are two terminologies that are used here, activity guide categories and activity guide templates. Now, the activity guide categories is essentially the component that is part of the activity guide framework that takes care of all these technical items. When I say takes care, this is the place, this is where you link all the technical items that are associated with an activity guide category. So essentially, the configuring an activity guide category requires technical knowledge and technical assistance to do that. And this first step needs to happen before we go ahead and create the guided process templates. So the distinction between an activity guide category and an activity guide template is activity guide category is the foundational aspect that brings together the technical elements that determine how the template should behave. This needs to happen first before the templates are created. And the templates can be managed by people who do not have in-depth technical understanding or a technical role in the organization. So a functional analyst or business process analyst can maintain and update the templates. However, making changes to the category or updating the guided process to include additional things, etc., would need the technical know-how of how to do it. So that's the reason I wanted to clearly distinguish between the category and the template. Category comes first. So what is involved in this categories? So the category, the first and foremost item is an application package, which is people code, a group of people code functions and libraries that controls the behavior of the activity guide. Now, when you want to create a custom guided process, you don't have to start from scratch. You can clone a delivered application package and a delivered guided process to have those baseline and then make your changes to that. You don't have to start it from scratch. Just like any other PeopleSoft functionality, you can clone whatever is the closest one and then work from there. Okay. So it starts with the people code libraries that control the activity guide, determines the security of who can make changes to the guides, who can make changes to the templates, etc. What are the data fields that are going to be used in the guide? What are the data actions that are going to be available in the guide, etc. So these are some of the items, or these are basically all the items that are going to be controlled within the activity guide category. The most important aspect here is, of course, this item that is called as steps. And this steps is where we would spend most of the time in terms of setting up a guided process, because steps are what are going to be the individual steps within the guided process. That list is maintained in this activity guide category. Okay. After the next slide, I will show a quick demo of the guided activity guide category and template. So you'll be able to put these pieces together, right? So once this framework is defined in terms of this is how the guided process behavior is going to be, then we go ahead and create a template for this activity guide category. A single process can have multiple templates. Templates are essentially variations in the guided process. So when would you need to have different templates is when you want to have slight variations. For example, an onboarding process could be different from one region to another, from one job family to other job family. Executives may have to go through a different onboarding process compared to an academic person, right? So you could create different variations of the guided process using these templates and define rules on how to associate the templates to those users based on whatever is the association rule, right? For example, it could be job family, it could be job code, it could be region, it could be department, location, any information, right? You can associate your rules. So what is part of the template setup is basically how to identify the security of the users, who all have a role within the guided process. That determines the security items, what actions we want to allow, how the look and feel of the process should behave, how the steps would be organized, how the steps would be grouped, subgroups, etc. What are the dependencies between the steps, and the email notification parameters that are part of the guided process. So these would typically fall in the templates. One thing to remember is the activity guide category is a superset of the templates, right? What I mean by that is you might have 10 different steps an onboarding person may have to do for one country like USA, while a person in Canada might have only need to do 5 onboarding steps as part of their onboarding in the organization. However, every template can have its own list of steps in the order in which you want within the template, but all those steps will need to be part of the category. So category is a superset of what all can be added to a template. Okay, and you can have multiple versions of the template. Both category and templates are effective data. Now, these two aspects, the categories and templates, are the critical foundational aspect of the framework itself. So one item I want to quickly highlight before I jump on to show a demo video is, if you remember earlier I mentioned about the activity guide composer framework that is available was preceded by a People Tools framework for activity guides. And that People Tools framework still exists. Only the only reason it is not readily readily accessible is because the activity guide composer framework sort of provides an encapsulation to the tools framework. So what I mean by that is, when an activity guide category and template are set up in the activity guide composer framework, those two things together automatically creates and updates the tools framework associated with it on the backend. So user don't have to do it. That simplifies the technical know-how or the knowledge that the user would need to maintain these templates. So when you go and make a change to an activity guide category or an activity guide template that you're in within the composer framework, the tools framework underneath those guides are getting updated automatically. Okay. The reason I want to call this out is this is a common question we have from different customers that we work with. When you want to migrate your changes from one environment to another, the activity guide composer framework changes that the user is making, since they know what they are changes they are making, they know to migrate that. There is a delivered migration process to handle that. However, most customers do not end up migrating the tools layer changes that are happening by the composer framework. So those tool changes will also have to be migrated for those changes to take effect in the target environment. So later in this presentation, there is a slide about migration. I will explain that what are the different data sets to be used. However, the reason you are including additional data sets in your migration, you need to migrate, is because the composer framework by default updates the tools framework associated with the activity guide. Okay, just be aware of that. All right, I'll see if there are any questions so far. I don't see anything, and we're getting close to the halfway time. I think we're doing good on time. So let me quickly do a demo. And for the demo, just to make sure we don't run across any issues in the environment, etc., I've pre-recorded a video. And as the video runs, I'm just going to quickly explain what is that is covered in the demo, right? And it's a pretty straightforward demo where I want to quickly walk through a custom activity guide category and a custom activity guide template. So as you can see here, the navigation is also in the slide deck, but I just want to quickly call out here. Everything to do with activity guide composer framework is under enterprise components, activity guide composer. And within that folder, there is activity guide categories, templates, and all the other advanced utilities that are available in here. Okay, so that's the navigation to get there. First, I'm going to the categories page, and I'll pick up a custom activity guide category that I've created as part of the training exercise. And I want to quickly stop here. So the first item that I spoke about in terms of the application package that controls the activity guide That's what is configured in the very first page of the activity guide, the root package ID. And as I said, that root package ID does not have to be created from scratch. You could pick up any delivered activity guide root package. It could be for the onboarding process, offboarding process, and clone it into a custom app package, and then control the behavior. These classes that are referred here are already part of those delivered activity guides, and basically controls how the guide is processed, what should happen when you complete a guide, when you cancel a guide, or when you create a guide. So the delivered code handles the updates to the framework tables. In addition to that, if there are any other process-specific table that you want to update, then that's when you would have to put your custom code into these packages. A good example that I use is, let's say, life events. There is a guided process for life events. Now, when a person goes through a life event, let's say if they decide to cancel a life event because it may not be applicable to them. Let's say if they cancel the life event, on cancel button, the instance of the activity guide would get deleted because the person is canceling it. However, let's say if the person had already created a benefit event, the benefit event would not be automatically canceled by the guided process. That needs to be handled as a code within that particular app package. So those are the examples where, in addition to the framework updates, framework-related updates, if you have to do any functionality or process-related updates, then those are the items that you need to make sure that's part of this app package people code. Okay, so that's where you would link those things. And the second tab within the guided process is the security. There is security within the category. There is security section within the template. The security section within the category controls who has access to edit the category and who has controls to add or update the templates. So those are the items that are determined at the category level. The security within the template is about which users or which roles would have access to the individual steps within the guided process. Okay, so the security within the category and template control completely different things. The security in the category controls who has access to the category, the pages that we are seeing now, and who has the ability to create or update templates. These are the roles that are delivered. You could have your custom roles in here as well. And next is the context. Now, context, to put it in a very simple term, context is essentially the data elements that you want to make use of within the guided process without having to write queries and SQLs to fetch those data elements. So for example, in this example, I have created a custom context record, which is a derived record, and I have used the key fields that would identify certain attributes of the person going through the guided process. So I'm basically using employee ID and employee record as key fields, and using getting the display name of the employee as a context field that I can use within the guided process. So when I'm addressing some instructions, I can say make it more personal and address it directly to the person doing the work. So that's an example of a context. Delivered activity guides pretty much use this as a model for addressing the user. There could be other parameters that can be brought in as well. As long as they can be linked and identified using those key values that are available in the activity guide, then those elements can be added as part of the context data fields. Next is the action list. What action should be available to the users? It gets listed, defined here, and within the templates, you can also make sure you can, within certain templates, you can allow or not allow certain actions. Typically, the actions are the cancel option to delete or end the guided process, mark an item complete, and marking the entire guided process complete. Those are the typical actions that are available. And one thing that we have used quite heavily on this particular configuration in our implementations are these message numbers and message set numbers. This comes in very handy. So what this allows is when you perform an action in the guided process, how do you want the instructions to be personalized? And that can be done using these message set numbers and message numbers. What I mean by that is canceling an onboarding process can show a different message versus canceling a live event process, right? Because instead of just saying that, do you want to complete, or do you want to cancel this process now? Click yes or no. Instead of saying something very generic, you can say that by proceeding to cancel this live event, a benefit change is not going to happen, and you may have to start this process again when you are ready. Or by canceling this onboarding process, so and so is going to be the impact, right? So you could personalize your messages using these controls over here as part of the guided process. Even the delivered guided process, this is where you would come and make a change. Make sure you always add a new effective dated row when you're changing the delivered categories. Okay. The next one is pretty straightforward, which is basically going through the what actions are available in that particular guide. Next one is quickly in terms of what images, if any, needs to be used as part of the guided process. Typically in the HR system, the employee photo is available, and there are delivered app classes that retrieve the photo and make it available. So the same classes can be used. There are logos and other things that can be added. So for whatever reason, if you have different images, those can be configured here. And the assignee section is where at a high level, or the base level, you define who all can be the users within this guided process. And it has to be defined here first before it can be used in the template. So let's say if the guided process is only for employees, it's an employee-driven activity, then you would just have employee as the assignee. And you can call out what role should be eligible to be used. Just by calling out what role is eligible doesn't mean everyone in this role are going to get access to this guide. I will show you where that is controlled. However, this is a level where you are saying what are the different users within this process. So in this example, there are two groups of users. It can be an administrator or it can be an employee. Now, for example, onboarding process is only employee driven, so it just needs to be employee. And offboarding, employee and manager. So in assignees, you have both employees and managers. Now, the steps is the most important page within the guided process setup, because this is where you define all the steps that can be included in your guided process. And in this example, there are six steps that are available that have been added. And for every step, there is ability to say, what are some of the pre things, what are some of the post things to do. Now, as I said before, there are frameworks like acknowledgement framework, questionnaire framework that are delivered to be used within activity guides. And when you use those steps within the process, there are additional configurations to allow to say, what is the acknowledgement template you want to use? What is the questionnaire template you want to use, etc. Right? So within this acknowledgement, there is context-specific parameter that is getting passed that says here. So for this acknowledgement, for this guided process, you use the parameter ACKN1, which is the acknowledgement I want to use. This is an example of a benefit step using an external URL for benefits functionality, an emergency contact using a Fluid page for emergency contact, the standard delivered summary step, and an employee survey. Once again, you can pass what is the survey ID you want to use. So all these steps, I think a majority of them are delivered in one of those processes like onboarding, offboarding, etc. You can review and make use of it if you are building your custom guided process. you could create completely new steps for any PeopleSoft component or a non-PeopleSoft URL you could include as part of the guided process. Whenever you are using a delivered step like a welcome video, acknowledgement, questionnaire, survey, etc., there are always these configuration options where you can pass your particular value as a parameter. For example, in this welcome video example, this service ID receives a parameter of a URL, which would contain the video link to the video. So for example, the video page alone has an additional configuration, says SMC AG video. That's the parameter I'm passing to send what should be the specific video that needs to be played for this particular guided process. So those are the things to look out for when you're setting up activity guide category. Okay. I do see a question here. Let me quickly check that. Can we disable or enable next and previous button by using code? This is for a custom guide based on PeopleSoft component. Now, the next and previous button, typically, the next button behavior is already controlled dynamically by the framework. The reason I say that is, when we go to the template process, I can explain you better. When we talk about a guided process, within the template, we define whether the guided process, the steps within the process need to be done sequentially or can it be done in any order. And when you decide to do it in any order, then the controls of next and previous are a little bit more easier or a little bit more fluid to maintain. When you do it sequentially, then the next and previous button, the behavior is controlled by the delivered framework itself in a way that if you had made a step mandatory, then the next button won't appear until you have entered the data on the page. So you can, again, to be very specific to your question, can it be controlled? Yes, it can be. However, you need to make sure you are not overriding some of your changes may not work because the delivered framework is also controlling the behavior based on the configuration settings. So that's something to keep in mind. So the first thing I would check in terms of next and previous button behavior is to say whether the guide is a sequential guide or a non-sequential guide. Okay, so based on that, we can control how things can be done there. When we go to the next part of the demo, which is the template, I will show you where exactly those things can be controlled. So in this example, I'm just going through a template that has been created for that activity guide category. Okay. Okay, let me go to that step once again. So yeah, I think the general information, descriptions, all those things are fine. It's the activity guide type that is the most important portion. So as I said here, the vertical sequential is the example that I've selected here. Vertical is how the steps are displayed, and sequential or non-sequential is how you want to control the behavior of the guided process. Can that person skip steps and just do whatever steps go front and back in terms of what steps they want to do, or whether you want to do it sequentially? This is very, very important because first thing is you would do the non-sequential option only when there is no link between different steps in the guided process. A user can do things in any order. For most guided processes, you can opt for a sequential approach because then you want them to go one step at a time. And when you make it sequential, it is the subsequent steps you can control whether what step should be enabled or disabled based on what they have completed. So sequential gives you better control in terms of how to handle the flow of the process. Okay, so just be aware. This is something that needs to be determined upfront. And once it is determined, it cannot be changed. That's the first thing that says at the top. A type of the activity guide template cannot be modified. And if you clone this template to create another template, that template would also follow the same type and it cannot be modified. So let's say if you have a template that is sequential, but you want to create another template that is non-sequential, you have to create the template separately and don't use the clone option to clone the existing template because you cannot change the type. Okay. So moving along, the next step is where for the assignees that we said who all would be participants in the guided process, we define who all will be included in this template and what are the roles associated with them. We just add them in here. And moving to the next step. So this is where within the template we control what are the actions that can be available and what are the labels, how we want to call them. In this example, the next and previous button I haven't used, but those are delivered buttons as well, and they could be used. And in the guide, in the application package that is associated with the category, every button could have its code, right? Within every, for every button, you could have a code that controls when they should appear, when they should not appear. When you click on that button, what should happen in addition to moving to the next step, if there are any updates need to happen, all those can be coded within the application library. Okay. All right. And the next step controls the display of the banner, what information should be available. And this information is pretty basic. And this is a place where you can make use of the context field that you have in the category and the image you have in the category. This is where you would say where those context information needs to be used. You determine in this step. And this step lists all the steps available in the category, and then you get to add them to your template. And the next step determines how you want to sequence them, group them, and how you want to control the order of the steps, behavior of the steps, etc. Now, one other thing I want to quickly add is, depending upon the step itself, there are delivered steps that uses contextual information. For example, the welcome video step has an instruction message where the personal data, which is the name information from personal data, which is one of the context fields, is being utilized. So when you add context field to the guide, this is the place to make use of those context fields in terms of instruction messages, etc. Now, not every step is going to have these instructional messages. The welcome video summary page, etc., they have been built with these configuration options. Other steps, the standard PeopleSoft components, etc., do not have these additional items to configure. Okay. And then you control whether this particular guided process need to be available in a place called My Process. I will talk about My Process when I go back to the slide deck. Okay. So this is like what I would call as a 100 miles per hour view of both the category and template. There are lots of items within every single page that we went through. So as I said, this session is only a summary version, and more in-depth training is available if you're interested. But just wanted to show you what a category is, what templates are, and what is the purpose and where you do what items, right? That's the idea here. And let's see if there are any questions. I don't see anything, so let's move forward. And doing a quick time check. We have another 15 minutes, so let's go through the remainder of the slides as well. So what is in that application package library that I mentioned? So here is a quick screenshot. This is essentially where you can clone the delivered library for an guided process and then make changes as needed. So this screenshot basically shows how an application library looks like. So it basically has one class that controls the instance process and another class for the navigation button controls. So when the question from Tim Thomas about how to control the behaviors of the previous and next button, the nav button controls app class is where you would add or control things about. If you want to add any conditional display logic, that's where you would do those items. Okay. Now let's say you have gone through the process of creating a guided process, like an activity guide. You have set up an activity guide category, an activity guide template. The next activity is about how do you make this guided process available to your users. Now, there is a place called My Processes within the activity guide framework, where a centralized page where you can say whether your guided process should be available under My Process. But that My Process to me is, based on our usage so far, is more like a testing place where you can easily launch the guided process based on the individual contextual parameters and test out the guided process. In addition to that, how do you roll it out to end users? Let's say you have built a guided process to run a survey in your organization. You want employees to go fill out that survey as part of an yearly activity in your organization. How do you launch it to all employees? Or if it's only managers, how do you launch it to all managers? There are a couple of ways to go about it. You could have a launch tile that would launch a guided process to the user, or it could be linked to a page or a component where you may have to already do certain things before you launch the guided process. Either of those options are fine. The delivered guides use both these options in different places. So the first screenshot on the left top corner is the tile for onboarding activities. And when the user clicks on the onboarding activities tile, it launches the guided process for that employee. The second example is a live event page where user first have to choose a live event. And based on a live event, a template gets selected, meaning you could have different templates for different live event, and that's how it is delivered. There are 4 different live event templates that are delivered. So an adoption template or a birth template would be different to the other templates. So first, the user selects these live event and chooses a date and clicks on this button, Start a Live Event, which will launch the guided process. So what is happening in both these scenarios is when you are launching a guided process, for the guided process, you need to pass certain parameters, whether it's the employee ID, employment record number, the live event type. Depending upon the key structure of the guided process, you need to pass those unique parameters to launch that guided process. And how do we get those unique parameters? Determine whether you want to use a tile or whether you want to use a page, because you need that information for the guided process to begin. So when it's an employee beginning an onboarding, all we need is the employee ID and the employment record number, most likely just the employee ID, and that's available based on the user who is logged in. So click on a tile, you can launch that. A live event, since there are multiple templates and you need the employee to choose an event type, so you collect that info and then launch the activity guided process. Now, the guided process itself can be launched using a people code. And here is a very simple example of the people code that is used to launch the guided process, basically setting up the contextual parameters and calling the delivered framework component and redirecting user to the URL. The delivered guided processes also follow the same model, whether it is called out of a tile or called out of a custom page, they also follow the standard. This is the logic that is used. So if you have built a custom process and want to launch it in any other means, you could use that. I had a customer who wanted to see if they do it from a batch process or not. I think, which misses a point that the guided process actually is a user interactive way of completing the activity. So most likely you would never, I can't think of a scenario where you need to launch a process using batch process in bulk, right? So another thing that that is linked to that question from that other customer is when we say a guided process is assigned to a user, it's basically we are assigning the ability for a user to launch the process. We are not pre-assigning any specific data to the user. So we are basically setting up the user to have the security to the page or a tile where they can launch the guided process from. The instance specific to the user gets launched when they initiate it, either go to a tile or go to a page, etc. When they click a button, that's when they are actually initiating the guided process for themselves. And that's when you have an instance of a guided process specifically assigned to them. Until then, we are basically providing them the ability to do so. Okay. All right. So I think we have another 8 minutes. I think we have a few more important things to cover. So this is a very deep area in terms of the guided process management. Is that, let's say once you have set up a guided process, assign the guided process to the user, and let's say users have started using them, where do you manage the guided process instances and templates, right? So this is where you move on from the Activity Guide Composer framework into the People Tools layer of the Activity Guide management. And you can notice the first thing at the navigation within People Tools Activity Guide framework, you have a couple of pages, which is the Activity Guide templates. The reason I want to call out this page is this is where you would have the People Tools version of the Activity Guides created and the property set based on the setup you have done in the Activity Guide category and template. Okay, so when I said earlier that when you want to migrate your category and template changes, you also need to make sure your People Tools version of the Activity Guide gets migrated. This is this configuration that needs to be migrated. So that's the navigation to get there. Okay, so obviously, when every guided template that is available here, there are properties that get defined by the Activity Guide Composer. I know there are certain scenarios customers directly go in here and make changes. Wouldn't recommend it at all. Whenever there needs to be a property change, go to your Activity Guide Composer category or template and make the changes there, and let the People Tools properties get maintained by the framework itself. Do not directly go into the properties in here and make changes. Okay. Now there is also a page within People Tools Activity Guides for Activity Guide instances, and this is where you would find a unique instance for every guided process that has been initiated by a user and that hasn't been completed. Okay. If a user cancels a process, it would delete the instance here. If a user has completed, then it will become inactive here. Okay. So if you need to check how far, whether a user has started it, whether a user has completed it, what is the progress of it, this is the page to come and find that information. However, there are underlying tables behind this where you can query as well. So I have included a slide with all the underlying tables as well, so you could easily create a query out of them to get the reports out. Okay, because this page, very rarely users go in to find a template by either the name of the user who created, like the operator ID of the user who created it, when it may have been created, etc., and try to find the information. Not a very user-friendly page, but at least it has some basic information to filter by. Okay. Now, within the an instance of an activity guide, there is a lot of things an administrator can do, and it comes in handy to debug. And I know if we had a lot of time, I would go very much detail into it. We have had a lot of scenarios as we work through in terms of supporting customers, very weird scenarios that come across in terms of guided process. For example, an employee who's going through an onboarding was able to see some steps, but some of the steps were grayed out. They can't access it. It always said the steps have been assigned to another user. So there is no easy way to find why some steps are available while some are not available. All those things, why when a user is having issues with certain steps, you need to go into the instance and steps and properties. This is the place to come in and see what is happening, right? Who is it assigned to? In this particular tab, you can see this is general information, but the second tab is user assignment and status. So in that one example, I said user was able to see some steps, but not able to access some steps. That's because, let's say, the user in that particular example, employee started with a particular operator ID that was assigned to them. Then they had a change in the operator ID because they had a change to their Active Directory identity, and the onboarding template was reassigned to the new ID. Now, an instance that is once started, depending upon the parameters or properties in the template setup, some steps would be assigned at the beginning when the user launches an instance. Some steps would be assigned when they actually go to the step. So depending upon those behaviors, every step may get assigned or not assigned to the right user profile, etc. Right? So that's where you need to go into the user assignment status and see what is the operator that is associated with the step. So if for example, if a person has marked it complete accidentally, if you want to change it, all those things, you could play around the properties in here. I wouldn't say do it, but this is the place where you can come and find and work with that information. Okay. As I said, as part of the deck, there is all these tables that are part of the tools tables that contain the same information that we saw on the previous snapshots. So if you need to query any of the information, see how things are assigned, who is it assigned with, what status it is, these are the tables to go and find that information from. Okay. When it comes to activity guide security, there are multiple layers. So this slide explains that. The delivered roles, user should have the AG Composer roles to work with these pages that I've shown so far, category, template, etc. What are the delivered roles? I've called out the 3 roles that are needed for the 3 different areas that we have seen today. The guide and the security in the activity guide category controls who should have access to update the templates, who should have access to make changes to the category. Assignees tab defines who should be able to access certain steps. Most importantly, in addition to all of this, the user should have access to the actual pages you are going through in the guided process. If not, that could also be a security issue. Just because they have an access to a step in the guided process doesn't mean they get access to do that step. So for example, what I mean is an employee should have access to the direct deposit page, tax withholding page, address information page before they can do those steps inside the guided process, right? So the core access to the underlying pages and functionality should be there. All right. In addition to all of this, you would also user would also need access to the frameworks like the questionnaire framework and the acknowledgement framework. They should have the user level access to those frameworks if they have to do those steps as well. So let's keep those things in mind. Pretty much run out of time. There is more information about the advanced features here that I'm not able to cover, but all this information is part of the slide deck. So feel free to review this information and reach out if you have any questions. I do have a couple of items here. Quickly check. Does activity guide allow save for later, meaning can a user come back? Absolutely, yes. An activity, a guided process, a user can exit anytime, come back and continue from that step. Any data they have completed until on the individual steps and saved it, those would be as saved, right? Those will be saved and be available. They don't have to redo it. And the guided process completion, whatever steps they have completed will also be saved. Okay. All right. I do not want to take a lot more of time that is available. Feel free to post any question and also reach out if you have any further questions. With that, I will stop sharing and also stop recording as well. Thank you very much for all of your time, and hope all of you have a great rest of the conference as well. Okay. Thank you.